A pregnant and homeless woman is hired by a billionaire to care for his paralyzed son. But what she heals is more than just the child. The morning fog hung low over the empty road, softening the outlines of pine trees that flanked the edges like silent guards. Early spring had painted the Virginia countryside in muted grays, the earth still damp from last night's rain. James Whitmore had once been one of the top tech investors in America. His name used to appear in Forbes lists and business panels, often followed by words like visionary and unshakable. But 3 years ago, everything changed. A car accident on a rainy highway took his wife's life and left his only son, Marcus, paralyzed from the waist down. And right now, in James's SUV, the air was a contrast to the cold outside, but the tension inside was even colder. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, hands folded protectively over her swollen belly. She hadn't spoken much since stepping into the vehicle, just a polite nod and a quiet thank you before buckling her seatbelt. Her coat was worn thin at the elbows, her boots scuffed, but she sat upright, chin lifted, not defensive, just bracing. James Whitmore tapped the steering wheel with one gloved finger. His navy coat fit him perfectly, the kind of tailored that whispered money. But the lines around his mouth told a different story, one etched by sleepless nights and things lost. "You don't have to be afraid," he said finally, eyes still on the road. "I'm not," Rachel answered, her voice low but steady. James glanced sideways. "That's good, because fear tends to drown people, especially when they're already treading water." She didn't reply. Her fingers moved slightly on her belly, the only visible reaction. James cleared his throat, more out of habit than discomfort. "I'm going to be honest with you, Miss Moore. I didn't pick you because of your resume." "I don't have one," she said flatly. "I know." The silence settled between them again. But it wasn't quite silence. It was the silence of unasked questions, the kind you felt more than heard. Rachel turned her gaze out the window. "Then why am I here?" James pressed his lips together, as if chewing on the truth. "A woman I trust, Mrs. Kent from the shelter, told me about you. Said you were smart, capable, used to teach before I became a charity case." He didn't flinch. "Before things got complicated." Rachel looked at him now, properly. "You don't know me. You don't know what kind of person I am, what I've done or haven't done. Why would you bring me into your home, near your child?" James let out a breath. It fogged the windshield, despite the car's warm air. "Because I've had a dozen caregivers with degrees and spotless records, and none of them made it past the second week. My son needs something else. Someone was truly different." "You think that's me?" she asked, incredulous. He nodded. "I don't need someone perfect. I need someone who hasn't given up yet." Rachel blinked, but said nothing. She pressed her lips together, like she didn't trust her own mouth. "My son doesn't talk much," James added. "Not since the accident. He's 16, and angry, very angry. If you're expecting gratitude, or even politeness—" "I'm not," she cut in. He looked at her again, properly this time. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes tired but alert. There was no desperation in her expression, just resolve. James recognized that look. He'd worn it himself once, years ago. His phone buzzed. He pressed a button on the steering wheel. "Yes, Hargrove?" Mrs. Hargrove's voice crackled through the car speakers. "The room is ready. I assumed West Wing, as discussed." "Yes." A pause. "You've never put anyone there before, sir." James paused. "I know." He ended the call without elaboration. Rachel watched him, one eyebrow raised. "She's your housekeeper." "She's family," James said, almost too quickly. "Been with us longer than I've had the house. She'll be part of this, if you stay." "If?" Rachel echoed. He pulled the car to the side of the gravel driveway. The mansion came into view, grey stone, weathered, but elegant. It looked like a place where sound didn't echo, just got swallowed whole. "If you still want the job after meeting Marcus," James said quietly, "he has a way of testing people." Rachel tilted her head. "Is this a test?" "Everything is a test," he murmured. She nodded slowly. "One question, though. Ask. What makes you think I haven't given up?" James didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned in his seat and looked at her directly. "Because you're 6 months pregnant, homeless, and still didn't flinch when I told you my son is a handful. That's not proof of anything. It is to me." He paused. "Look, I know this isn't a conventional hire. I've done things backwards. I'm not going to apologize for that." Rachel turned back to the window. "I slept in a car with a broken window last night. The wind cut through like a blade. I told myself if someone offered me anything, I'd say yes before thinking. I guess that makes us both desperate." James stared out at the house ahead. Desperate people get things done. He stepped out and walked around to open her door. Rachel hesitated a second, then took his hand and eased herself out of the car. She looked at the estate with wary eyes. "Big place," she murmured. "Too big," he said. As they walked toward the entrance, Rachel glanced sideways. "Why me, really?" James gave the barest shrug. "I don't need a perfect resume. I need someone who knows what it's like to fight for something that doesn't always love you back." Rachel stopped in her tracks. Her voice was quiet, but sharp. "Don't make me a metaphor, Mr. Whitmore. I'm tired, not inspiring." He chuckled, dry, amused. "Fair enough?" She looked at the mansion again. "All right," she said. "Let's see if your son hates me." And with that, they stepped inside. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish and something older, dust maybe, or time. Morning light spilled through tall windows, but did little to warm the long stretch of marble beneath their feet. Rachel's steps echoed faintly as she followed the housekeeper through the west wing, past rooms with closed doors and air too still. Mrs. Hargrove walked ahead, posture straight as a ruler. Her silver bun was tight, not a strand out of place. She didn't speak at first. Rachel didn't push it. "He's awake," the older woman said finally, stopping in front of a thick white door. "He always is. Doesn't sleep much. Pain does that." Rachel nodded, adjusting her coat over her stomach. Mrs. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. Not unkindly, not warmly either. Just weighing. "You don't need to impress him," she said. "He doesn't care. But he'll see through you fast if you try too hard." Rachel offered a wry smile. "Trying too hard is not really my current strength." A soft snort. Then the housekeeper stepped aside. "He'll hear you. You don't have to knock." Rachel stood at the door for a breath longer than she meant to. Her hand hovered mid-air, then dropped. Before she could decide, a voice came from inside, flat and young and unmistakably unimpressed. "You planning to stand there all day?" Rachel pushed the door open. The room was large and cold in the way a museum feels cold, even with light pouring in. The furniture was expensive, the technology modern, flat screens, a motorized bed, voice-controlled lights, but everything bore a thin film of dust. A half-finished model car sat untouched on the desk. A basketball sat in the corner, like a memory someone forgot to throw away. Marcus Whitmore sat in a custom wheelchair near the window, one leg braced, the other stiff. Headphones around his neck, remote on the armrest. He didn't turn when she entered. "You're early," he said. "Didn't get the memo on what counts as fashionably late around here," Rachel replied. Still no glance her way. "You can drop the act now. They all start chipper." Rachel stepped further in, letting the door click behind her. She looked around, slowly, noticing things, not pretending not to. She brushed her fingers across the dusty shelf, picked up the basketball. Spaulding, worn grip, she said, guessing this wasn't just for show. That's none of your business. She put the ball down gently, like it meant something. You're right. Finally, Marcus turned. His face was sharper than James's, younger but already tired. I give it 3 days, he said. You'll be gone by then. Rachel didn't flinch. You're probably right. But I'm not here for 3 days. I'm here for at least an hour. His brow ticked up, just slightly. Clever. No, she said, easing into the chair by the window. Just honest. Marcus eyed her belly, then looked away. They really sent a pregnant woman. That's new. Congratulations. You're my first too. That earned a short breath from him. Maybe not quite a laugh, but not quite a scoff either. Progress. She let the silence stretch. Not uncomfortable, just unhurried. After a moment, she reached for the model car on the desk. Mind if I don't touch that, Marcus said, voice sharp. Rachel paused, put both hands back in her lap. Noted. He didn't explain, and she didn't ask. Instead, her gaze flicked to a photo frame on the far shelf, covered in dust like everything else. She couldn't see the faces, but the shape of it. The 3 figures, the middle one slightly shorter, told enough. My room used to look like that, she said quietly, when I stopped going in. After my mom died. He didn't say anything, but his fingers flexed over the remote. Rachel leaned back. I get it. You don't want someone new coming in and rearranging your silence. Marcus's voice was quieter now, but no less certain. You should go. I will, she said, when the hour's up. He turned fully toward her, then. I don't want you here. I didn't expect a welcome mat. Marcus stared hard at her, as if willing her to react, to get defensive, to flinch, but she only tilted her head. I'm not here to fix you, she said. I'm not even sure I know how to fix myself, but I don't scare easily anymore. Not since sleeping through a winter in a broken-down Ford. You lived in your car? Rachel gave him a sideways glance. Still do, technically. Marcus frowned. Why'd you take this job? She shrugged. Because it was offered, and because I told the thing growing in here, she patted her stomach lightly, that I was done running. The silence shifted then. Not softer, but different. Less brittle. He didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't look impressed. But he didn't repeat the request for her to leave either. Outside, somewhere far off in the house, a grandfather clock chimed once. Rachel checked the watch on her wrist. 58 minutes left, she said lightly. Unless you want to make a bet. Marcus turned back toward the window. You won't last. Rachel leaned back in her chair. Maybe not, she said, but if I'm going down, I'd rather go down in a room, with a view. He didn't smile, but she saw his fingers stop clenching, and she stayed. Before we get into the next part, I would love to know what kind of stories you like to read. If you like my story, please like, comment, number 100 in the comments. The rain had returned by evening, whispering against the tall windows in rhythmic taps. The light inside Marcus's room was dim, warm in color, but unable to touch the corners, which still clung to shadows. The clock on the wall ticked evenly, the kind of sound that fills a room when no one speaks. Rachel came in without knocking. She'd changed into an old grey sweater that stretched gently over her belly and carried a small blanket under one arm. No tray of tea, no clipboard, just herself. Marcus didn't look up. He was where he always was, by the window, half turned from the world. She didn't speak either. Not at first. She just moved to the far chair by the bookcase, not the one near him, and settled in like someone who'd done this before. After a while, Marcus spoke, voice dry. "So now what? You just, sit?" Rachel gave a non-committal shrug. "Unless you kick me out. It's your room." He didn't respond, but he didn't ask her to leave. Rachel adjusted in the chair, winced a little, rubbed her lower back, then placed a hand lightly on her stomach. The sound of the rain blended with the clock ticks and the low hum of Marcus's wheelchair motor, barely noticeable anymore. She began speaking softly, almost like to herself, but not quite. "There was a cat once," she said, "at the old bus station near Holloway. Skinny thing with a torn ear. White paw, just the one. Used to sit under the vending machine every morning." No reaction from Marcus. Rachel's voice stayed even. "It followed me one day. Not close. Just a few feet back. Like it didn't want to be alone, but also didn't want to be seen needing anyone." Still nothing. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. "I think I liked that about it." Marcus turned his head slightly, almost imperceptibly. "You talk to it too?" he asked after a pause. Rachel cracked one eye open, looked over. "Talk to everything back then. Lamp posts, plastic bags, my own feet." "That's not normal." "I wasn't going for normal." Marcus looked away again, but his mouth twitched. They sat in silence again. Rachel pulled the blanket over her lap. Her hand moved back to her stomach, fingers tracing lazy circles. Her voice came again, this time a whisper, not meant for Marcus, not even really meant to be heard. "You've been quiet today," she said to her belly, "but that's okay. It's rainy. Rainy days are good for staying still." She yawned, rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand. "Maybe we'll get to stay here. Maybe not. Don't get too cozy." Marcus shifted. "You talk to it like it's listening." Rachel opened her eyes, but didn't lift her head. "Isn't that what talking is? Saying something just in case someone's listening?" He blinked, looked at her for a long time. "You're weird." Rachel smiled faintly. "Thanks." They lapsed back into silence. The kind that wasn't heavy, just resting. Marcus tapped his fingers against the armrest of his chair, an absent rhythm. Rachel curled further into her seat, head leaning against the wall now. Her breathing had slowed. Her hand still rested protectively across her belly. Marcus looked over. Her shoes were muddy at the soles. Her sweater was fraying at one cuff. Her jaw looked too tight, like someone who didn't unclench even in sleep. Still, she'd come back. She hadn't brought snacks, or activities, or cheerful exaggerated small talk. Just sat there, talked to the air, talked to herself, talked to the baby. It was different. He glanced at the clock. Nearly 9. His usual bedtime had passed, but no one had reminded him. Mrs. Hargrove hadn't peeked in. His father hadn't texted. Not that he expected them to. He looked at Rachel again. She was asleep now. Not deeply, but enough. Her hand twitched once on her stomach. Her head nodded to the side. The blanket had slipped slightly down her legs. Marcus reached over and with awkward effort nudged the remote on his chair. The lights dimmed. He didn't know why he did it, just that the brightness seemed unfair somehow. He watched her for another moment, then turned slowly back toward the window. The rain had picked up again, and Rachel slept, still holding her belly, her breath steady. She'd fallen asleep on the hard wooden chair like it was hers. Like this room, dusty, quiet, and full of ghosts, was home. And Marcus let her stay. The next morning, the air inside Marcus's room was cool and sharp, like it hadn't remembered to warm up with the rest of the house. Light streamed in through the high windows in angled shafts, catching dust motes that floated lazily like tiny ghosts. The scent of old leather and machine oil still clung to the corners. Rachel came in, balancing a rolled mat under one arm and a small towel draped around her neck. Her hair was tied back in a rough bun, and she wore a loose black t-shirt stretched over her belly. She didn't smile. She didn't greet. Marcus was already in his chair, arms folded, mouth set. "You're kidding." Rachel dropped the mat onto the carpet with a muted thud. "Nope." He looked down at the mat, then back at her. "What is this? Amateur yoga hour?" "Physical therapy," she replied, straightening slowly. "Per your doctor's orders, and your father's, and Mrs. Hargrove's, probably God's too." "I'm not doing that," he said flatly. "You don't have to," she said. "You just have to watch me do it until you get bored." He stared at her. "That's manipulative." Rachel sank down to the floor with a quiet grunt and started to stretch her legs. "And yet, here we are." Marcus watched in silence as she settled herself on the mat, one hand occasionally bracing her stomach, the other adjusting her position. Her movements were slow, but deliberate, grounded. "Should you even be doing this?" he asked after a beat. "You look like you're about to pop." Rachel didn't look up. "Worried about me, Marcus?" He scowled. "No." "Good," she said, lifting one arm. "Then let me be your cautionary tale." He shook his head and wheeled away toward the window. They went like that for 15 minutes. Rachel stretched, breathed, counted under her breath. Said nothing more. Marcus eventually wheeled back over, close enough to see, but far enough not to look involved. When she finally stood, she wiped her forehead with the towel and looked at him. "Your turn." Marcus scoffed. "What part of me in a wheelchair didn't you understand?" "I understood all of it," Rachel said. "But unless your arms stopped working last night, we've got plenty to start with." He crossed his arms tighter. "It won't help." "It might." "It won't." Rachel tilted her head, voice quiet. "You sound sure, like someone who's already decided." He didn't answer. She walked over to the side cabinet, pulled out 2 small hand weights, and placed them on the tray next to his chair. "We'll start with these. Just 10 minutes. You can stop after that. No speeches, no miracle stories." He stared at the weights, like they were bombs. Rachel crouched slightly, steadying herself on one knee. Her voice was low. "I don't pity you, Marcus. If that's what you're pushing against, you're wasting energy." His jaw tightened. "You don't think I'm pathetic?" "I think you're angry," she said, "and smart, and tired. But no, I don't think you're pathetic. I think you're strong." She stood again with effort, rubbing her lower back. "I'm just waiting for you to prove it." A beat, then another. Marcus picked up one of the weights and turned it in his hand. "That line probably sounded cooler in your head," he muttered. Rachel smiled, faint and crooked. "It usually does." He lifted the weight once, then again. His wrist trembled slightly. He switched arms without comment. They did 10 minutes. The next day, they did 12. By the 4th day, he stopped making sarcastic comments every time she entered the room. But he still grumbled. "This is pointless," he said on day 5, arms shaking after a round of slow, careful curls. "I'm not going to walk again." Rachel handed him a cold towel. "Then don't do it to walk. Do it to fight." "For what?" "For not becoming the kind of person who stops trying." Marcus paused. He didn't meet her eyes. "You're kind of intense. You know that?" Rachel shrugged. "You'd be intense too, if you'd almost fallen down a subway stairwell in your 3rd trimester." Marcus glanced at her. "You what?" She sat down on the floor beside his chair, stretching one leg out slowly. 2 months ago. My knee still clicks when it rains. But I didn't break. Neither will you." He didn't say anything for a long while. Then quietly, "You think you can scare me into trying harder?" Rachel shook her head. "Number. I don't need you to be happy, Marcus. I don't even need you to like me." He looked at her then. "I just need you not to give up." For the first time in the hour, he didn't roll his eyes. He picked up the weights again. From the hallway, unseen but not unaware, Mrs. Hargrove paused as she walked by the room. She didn't step in. She didn't interrupt. But she smiled. Inside, the clock on the wall kept ticking, and Marcus kept going. The garden behind the Whitmore estate was quiet this time of day, the kind of quiet that felt earned rather than empty. Late afternoon sunlight pressed gently through the branches of a large elm tree, dappling the grass with shifting gold. Somewhere nearby, a breeze rustled the hedges, just enough to sound like someone breathing. Rachel sat on a stone bench, both hands resting on the curve of her stomach. Her shoes were off, toes buried in the cool grass. A children's book lay open on her lap, the pages worn, one corner chewed from age or memory. She wasn't reading, just holding it. Marcus approached slowly, his wheelchair humming softly along the stone path. He stopped a few feet away, one brow raised. "Seriously? You're reading fairy tales now?" Rachel didn't look up. "Number, I'm remembering them." Marcus snorted. "That better?" "Depends on the memory," she said, flipping a page. A silence settled in that wasn't awkward, just cautious, like neither of them knew how close they could sit without saying too much. Rachel closed the book and glanced up at him. "You came out here on your own." Marcus looked away. "The light in my room sucked." She smiled at that. Not broadly, just enough to feel real. They sat that way for a while. The sounds around them were ordinary. A bird calling from the fence, wind moving through ivy, distant laughter from a neighbor's yard neither of them could see. Rachel's voice, when it came, was soft. The first time I realized he wasn't coming back, I was holding a coupon for prenatal vitamins. Marcus didn't respond, but his head turned slightly. "I was standing in the store," she continued, "hand on the cart, hand on my belly, just staring at that little square of paper like it owed me something." "What happened?" he asked, barely audible. "I texted him," Rachel said. "Just a picture of the vitamins. No words." He didn't answer. He never did again. She didn't cry when she said it. She didn't tremble or break. She just let the memory sit between them, still and weighty. Marcus shifted in his chair. "You were together long?" Rachel shook her head. "Long enough for me to think we were." He watched her for a moment, really watched, like he hadn't done before. "Did he know you were pregnant?" "Yes." Marcus frowned. "And he still left?" She nodded. They fell into another silence, this one deeper, sharper. Rachel picked a blade of grass and twisted it between her fingers. "People leave. Sometimes with warning, sometimes in the middle of a sentence." I stopped trying to guess which is worse. Marcus looked down at his lap. "Yeah." She looked at him then. "You get it." He didn't speak for a long while. Then, "I hate adults." Rachel raised a brow. "They say they'll stay," he said, voice rough. "They say they'll help, but they don't, even when they mean to. They go away or they check out. Same thing." Rachel nodded slowly. "I know." Marcus clenched the armrest of his chair. "I hate that my mum left. I hate that my dad didn't. I hate that I still miss her. And I hate that I keep waiting for him to act like he's still my dad." Rachel said nothing. "I hate that everyone keeps telling me it gets better," Marcus added. "That it's going to be okay. That's crap. It's not okay." "I'm not going to say it is," Rachel said. That made him pause. "I'm not here to tell you what to feel," she said. "I'm not here to fix it. Or you." He looked at her again, brow furrowed. "I'm just here," she said. Marcus's voice dropped. "For how long?" Rachel turned to face him fully. "As long as you don't tell me to leave." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. They sat like that for minutes that felt stretched thin. The sun dropped lower, casting the bench and chair in half shadow. Rachel leaned back slowly, one hand rubbing her side. "Teaching was the only thing I ever really wanted," she said. "Even when I was a kid, I'd line up my stuffed animals and pretend I was reading them stories." Marcus's lips twitched. "Nerd." "Totally," Rachel agreed. He glanced at the book on her lap. "What's that one?" Rachel held it up. "The Velveteen Rabbit. Ever read it?" "No." "You'd hate it," she said. "Too much heart, not enough explosions." Marcus huffed, almost a laugh. "That sounds about right." Rachel looked at him gently. "But it's about something real. About being loved so hard, you become real. Even if it hurts." That seemed to land somewhere deep. Marcus stared past her for a moment, jaw tight, eyes distant. "I don't think I can do that," he said. "Be real again." Rachel leaned in, elbows on her knees. "You already are. You're angry. You're scared. You're here. That's as real as it gets." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "I still hate adults," he said quietly. "I still hate him," she replied, just as quietly. Marcus blinked, then looked at her, not with suspicion or defiance or guarded silence, but with understanding. Something loosened between them, not fixed, not solved, but acknowledged. From inside the house, the sliding door creaked open. Mrs. Hargrove stepped out, holding a tray with 2 mugs of tea. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said gently. Rachel waved her over. "You're always welcome." Mrs. Hargrove set the tray on the table and handed 1 mug to Marcus without a word. He took it, even said, "Thanks," so quietly the wind nearly swallowed it. As the housekeeper went back inside, Rachel blew gently on her tea. She watched Marcus from over the rim of the cup. He wasn't looking at her, but he wasn't looking away either. "You're still here," she said softly, not even sure he'd heard. But he had. And for once, he didn't argue. The dining room hadn't been used in months. Dust had been wiped clean from the long mahogany table, but the silence still lingered like a thin film on the walls. A single chandelier lit the space, soft and golden, hanging above 2 settings, one at the head of the table and one to the right, not across. Rachel stood at the entrance for a moment, unsure. Her hand hovered over the back of the chair, her other hand resting on her belly. James Whitmore entered from the side door, sleeves rolled slightly above his wrists, tie loose but still tucked into a well-pressed shirt. He nodded once. "Thanks for coming," he said, almost as if it were a favor. Rachel raised an eyebrow, easing herself down into the chair. Not exactly a long commute. He gave a dry smile and gestured to the plate. "I hope pasta's okay." "I'll try not to hold it against you," she replied. For a few minutes, they ate in relative silence, forks against ceramic, the occasional sip of water. It wasn't awkward, just unfamiliar. Like a truce between strangers who hadn't decided if they were on the same side yet. Rachel broke the quiet. "You don't strike me as someone who eats dinner in here very often." James looked up. "I don't. Not for a while." She didn't press. He appreciated that. Instead, she ran a finger lightly along the rim of her glass. "So why now?" He hesitated, then said, "I saw Marcus smile yesterday." Rachel didn't react right away. Then, "Good." "It was small," James added, as if needing to clarify. "A smirk, maybe." "He's allowed." James set his fork down, leaned back slightly. It's been a long time since I saw anything but the back of his head. You've managed something no one else has. Rachel met his eyes. You think this is about managing him? James paused. Isn't it? She studied him for a moment, then said carefully, Why did you hire me, Mr. Whitmore? You already asked me that. I want a real answer this time. James exhaled through his nose. Because Mrs. Kent said you weren't the type to give up easily. Rachel shook her head, just once. Try again. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Because you're the only one who's looked at my son and didn't flinch. She sat back, let the words settle. Then calmly, You didn't hire me for Marcus. You hired me for yourself. That landed with a quiet kind of violence. James straightened slightly. What makes you say that? Rachel's voice was even. Because you've been watching, from doorways, from windows. You hover like someone who wants to be let in, but doesn't know how. He didn't deny it. Rachel continued. And because it's easier to bring someone else in to reach him than to admit you can't. He nodded once. Slowly. You're not wrong. I've been that person, Rachel said. The one who brings in a third party because facing the damage directly feels impossible. James looked at her, but not like a man assessing, like a man listening. She softened her tone. I know what it's like to want to be forgiven before you've even apologized. James smiled, thin and tired. You're very good at reading people, Rachel smirked. Only the broken ones. That actually made him laugh. Quiet, honest, brief. He reached for the wine bottle, then paused, glancing at her stomach. Rachel waved him off. Go ahead. I'll live vicariously. He poured half a glass, took a sip, then looked at her over the rim. Do you regret it? She blinked. What? The pregnancy. Rachel didn't answer right away. She reached for her water, stared into it like it might hold the truth. I regret who I chose, she said finally, not what came from it. James nodded like he understood. She met his eyes again. Do you regret what your success cost you? He didn't answer. Didn't have to. Instead, he said, Marcus and I haven't had a full conversation in 8 months. Before the accident, he used to text me from school, just dumb things, photos of lunch trays, memes. I didn't always respond. Rachel waited. He added, Now I'd give anything to hear his voice say my name. Rachel's voice was soft. Have you tried? James gave a small, bitter smile. You think I haven't? I think maybe you stopped trying too early. He looked down at his plate, pushed a piece of pasta around. I didn't know how to be a father who failed, Rachel replied, gently but firm. Then learn to be a father who shows up. James looked at her, really looked. You're not just here for him, he said. No, she said. I'm here because someone has to be. The silence that followed was different. No longer uncomfortable, just open. They finished dinner slowly. Nothing dramatic, just two people carrying too much, trying to share the weight. When Rachel rose to leave, James stood too. She adjusted her coat around her belly and paused. He still wants you, she said. He just doesn't know how to want you, and survive the anger at the same time. James's voice was low. And you? I've already survived worse, she said, then added, and I don't flinch easily, remember? As she walked down the corridor, Mrs. Hargrove appeared from the side hall, polishing silverware. You stayed longer than I thought, the housekeeper said with a faint smile. Rachel glanced back toward the dining room. So did he. Rain whispered against the tall windows again, a gentle echo of the storm 2 nights before. The lamps in Marcus's room glowed low, casting a warm pool of light over the far side of the space where Rachel sat, her breath slower than usual. The smell of chamomile tea lingered untouched on the table beside her. Marcus noticed something was off before she said anything. She was quiet, but not in the way she usually was. Not thoughtful quiet. This was heavier. Her shoulders were slumped a little more. Her hands trembled when she set the mug down, and when she shifted positions in the chair, her breathing hitched. "You okay?" he asked, the words out before he had time to decide if he cared enough to ask. Rachel blinked, like she had to register the question. She offered a crooked smile. "Just a dizzy spell. I'm fine." "You don't look fine." "Well, I'm not here to look fine. I'm here to make you do another set." She tried to push herself to her feet, but halfway through, her hand gripped the back of the chair with sudden urgency. Her knees buckled slightly. "Hey!" Marcus's voice sharpened. Sit down. Now." Rachel didn't argue this time. She sank back into the chair, one hand pressed flat against her belly, the other at her temple. Her face had gone pale. "Mrs. Hargrove!" Marcus shouted, louder than he'd intended. "Someone get Mrs. Hargrove!" No answer. He rolled toward the intercom and pressed the call button, fast and firm. "Mrs. Hargrove, it's Marcus. Come to my room, now." The silence that followed was short, but it stretched too long for him. He wheeled back to Rachel. "What's wrong? Tell me." She forced a breath, eyes half-lidded. "It's just exhaustion. It happens. I didn't sleep well, that's all." Marcus sat there, heart thudding for reasons he didn't want to name. "That's not all. Don't lie to me." Rachel looked at him then, really looked, and managed a weak smile. "I'm not. I just need a minute." Mrs. Hargrove entered in a rush, hair slightly out of place. "What happened?" "She's dizzy. She almost passed out," Marcus said quickly. "She wouldn't say anything. She's not okay." The older woman moved fast, already at Rachel's side, checking her pulse, her breathing. Rachel mumbled something about being fine again, but even that sounded thinner now. Mrs. Hargrove met Marcus's eyes. "You did right calling me." He nodded, lips pressed into a tight line. "Help me get her to the couch," she said, gently. Marcus wheeled alongside as they guided Rachel to the soft, long couch across the room. Rachel murmured a thank you as she lay back, one arm draped across her stomach protectively. Her eyes closed, lashes fluttering slightly. She drifted off before either of them spoke again. Marcus didn't move for a moment. Mrs. Hargrove stood behind him, watching. "She's all right. Just overdid it. We'll get her some soup in a bit, and she'll need real rest." Marcus didn't answer. After a pause, Mrs. Hargrove quietly left the room. Still, Marcus didn't speak. He rolled closer. Rachel was asleep now, deep enough not to notice when he pulled the throw blanket from the back of the couch. He stared at it for a long second, then leaned forward and laid it gently across her, smoothing it near her shoulders. The room was quiet again. The hum of machines. The rain. He looked down at his lap, then reached into the side compartment of his chair. From it, he pulled a small object. A toy car, red, scratched. The kind that had sat untouched on his shelf for months. One of the few he'd ever built with his mom. The spoiler was broken. He'd never let anyone touch it. Until now. He set it gently on the table next to Rachel's tea. No words, no gesture, just left it there. He stared at her again, then said, under his breath, "I don't want you to go." Rachel didn't stir, but something about the line, said out loud, admitted into the room, settled the air differently. Later, when Mrs. Hargrove returned with a tray of broth and toast, she paused in the doorway. She saw the charn neatly tucked over Rachel. She saw Marcus, silent in his chair beside her, head tilted slightly in her direction. She said nothing, just smiled, small, and to herself, then left them be. The old art room smelled faintly of dried paint and pine dust. Afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, stretching soft gold across the wooden floor, where an easel still stood with a half-finished canvas long forgotten. Dust clung to the corners, but nothing felt abandoned, just paused. Marcus sat by the window, a sketchbook open on his lap. He wasn't drawing, just flipping the pages, some blank, some covered in uneven lines, half-finished car designs, others with smudged, graphite faces. Rachel sat across from him, her hands gently folded over her belly, a cushion pressed behind her back. "This used to be her room," Marcus said after a long silence. "My mum's. She painted in here almost every weekend." Rachel nodded, taking in the worn jars of brushes, the frames stacked against the wall. "I didn't know that," she said. "No one really comes in here anymore." He looked down, thumb tracing the edge of the paper. She used to say this was the only room in the house that felt like hers. Rachel smiled faintly. "Then it still does." They sat with the quiet for a while. Not uncomfortable. Just spacious. After a moment, Marcus looked up at her. His voice was quieter than usual. "What's it like, being a mum?" Rachel let the question settle. She looked out the window at the garden below, then turned back, her eyes softer than usual. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I haven't done it. Not really. Not the hard parts." "You're already doing it." She gave a small smile. "Carrying a child and raising one aren't the same. This little one hasn't asked me why life hurts yet. He hasn't looked at me and said, 'I hate you,' or slammed a door." Marcus didn't smile, but he was listening. Rachel shifted a little, feeling the weight of her belly press against her ribs. She exhaled slowly. "But the moment I knew I couldn't run," she said, "wasn't when the test came back positive. It wasn't when the doctor confirmed it. It was weeks later, after he'd already left." Marcus looked up. "I was in line at the store," she said, holding a bottle of vitamins and a coupon I'd printed in the library. And suddenly, I froze, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My world had just collapsed, and I was pretending I knew what cereal to buy. She let out a quiet breath. And then, right there in that aisle, I felt it. A tiny kick. Just once. Right below my ribs. Like this kid was reminding me, "Hey, I'm still here." Marcus blinked. His face was unreadable, but something in his jaw had gone still. "I didn't choose this," Rachel continued, voice low. "But from that moment, I knew I wouldn't walk away, even if it terrified me." Marcus looked down again. After a long pause, he asked, without looking up, "If you were my mum, would you have stayed?" The question hung in the air like a thread stretched too thin. Rachel didn't answer right away. She simply reached across the space between them and laid her hand gently over his. Marcus didn't pull away. His fingers twitched once beneath hers, then stilled. He stared at their hands for a long time. "You didn't have to answer," he said finally, voice almost a whisper. "I know," she said. They stayed like that for another minute. Then, 2. Eventually, Rachel leaned back slightly, letting her hand slip away without rush. "I think about it sometimes," Marcus said, voice more stable now. "If she'd lived, would she have stayed? If she saw me like this?" Rachel met his gaze. "You know she loved you, right?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "She was the only one who saw me, even when I was being an obnoxious little jerk. She still stayed." He nodded once. "That's the worst part. She didn't get to choose." Rachel was quiet. "She didn't get to walk away," he added. "But he did." Rachel didn't have to ask who he was. "Maybe that's why I hate people trying to replace her," Marcus said, barely audible. because they all feel like they're leaving before they even arrive. Rachel said nothing for a long time. Then, "I'm not here to replace her." "I know." She smiled, sad and honest. "But I'm not leaving either." From the hallway, the sound of careful footsteps approached. Mrs. Hargrove appeared in the doorway, holding a small, dusty box. "I thought you might want this," she said, setting it gently on the table. Marcus frowned. "What is it?" "Some of your drawings," she said, "from when you were little. Your mum kept them all." He hesitated, then opened the lid. Inside were crumpled sheets, childish scrawls of rockets, monsters, crooked houses. He sifted through them silently, then paused at one. A stick figure with red hair, labeled in big messy letters, "Mom." Rachel watched him gently. "She saved everything," Mrs. Hargrove said. "Even the ones you said weren't good enough." Marcus didn't respond, but his eyes stayed on the paper longer than necessary. Mrs. Hargrove gave Rachel a small nod, then quietly stepped out. Marcus looked up again. "I don't know how to feel when people stay." "You don't have to know," Rachel said. "Just let it happen." He nodded, then added, almost to himself, "You're not like the others." Rachel smiled, faint and warm. "Neither are you." He didn't say thank you, but he didn't have to. His fingers still rested on hers, long after her hand had moved away. The sky outside was turning the soft amber of late afternoon, casting long shadows across Marcus's bedroom floor. The air was still, save for the quiet ticking of the clock and the occasional hum of his motorized chair. Rachel sat by the window, speaking in low tones about nothing in particular. Some story about her favorite childhood movie, her voice just above a whisper. Then, without warning, she stopped mid-sentence. Her hand slipped from the armrest. Marcus looked over just in time to see her eyes flutter, unfocused. She tried to breathe in, but the sound was wrong, shallow, scattered. "Rachel," he said, straightening. "Hey, what?" She wavered, then collapsed sideways onto the floor with a thud that felt far too loud. "Rachel!" Marcus shouted, his heart lurching in a way he couldn't explain. He froze for a second, just a second. Then panic cracked through him like glass. "Mrs. Hargrove! Somebody!" He yanked the call button from his chair, but his hands were trembling so hard he could barely press it. His voice broke open. "Help! Please!" Footsteps pounded from down the hall. James's voice, low, urgent, cut through the panic. "What happened?" She just fell," Marcus stammered. She's not waking up." James barely glanced at Marcus. He was already on the floor beside Rachel, lifting her gently, one hand pressed to her forehead, the other to her wrist. "She's burning up," he muttered. "Call the car around." He scooped Rachel into his arms, her head slumping against his shoulder like it weighed more than it should. For a split second, Marcus saw something in his father's eyes he hadn't seen in years. Raw fear. Not the kind that shrinks, but the kind that moves. Then, they rushed her to the hospital. The hospital room was quiet, except for the beeping of machines and the slow rhythm of breathing. Fluorescent lights hummed above, soft and sterile. Outside the window, night had sunk deep into the city, washing everything in a still, blue-grey hush. Rachel hadn't moved in hours. Marcus sat beside her, arms folded tight across his chest, his wheelchair angled too close to the edge of the bed. He hadn't cried again, not since the car ride over, but his eyes still stung, and his chest felt cracked in places he didn't know existed until today. James was across the room, standing like a man who didn't know where to put his hands. One was shoved into his pocket, the other pressed flat against the window as he stared out at the darkness, but he wasn't seeing it. "She was just sitting there," Marcus said suddenly, voice rough. and then she slumped forward, like someone hit pause. James turned. "What happened before that?" "I don't know," Marcus snapped. Then, softer. "We were just talking." "She hadn't eaten," James muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Or slept, probably." "Not properly." Marcus looked at him. "Whose fault is that?" James blinked. "Because I don't think she forgot to take care of herself," Marcus said. "I think she was too busy taking care of us." James sat down across from him, elbows on his knees. His face looked older under the hospital light, less sharp, more worn. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then James said quietly, "I've done everything backwards. Hired a woman I didn't know. Let her into this house like she was a contractor. But she wasn't." Marcus didn't answer. James swallowed. "I don't think I understood what I was asking her to carry." "You weren't the only one," Marcus said. "I made it hard. On purpose." James exhaled. "I know." They both looked toward the bed. Rachel's face was pale, her breathing steady but faint. An IV drip fed slowly into her arm, and the monitor beside her blinked in soft green. Marcus said, barely above a whisper, "I thought she was dead," when she didn't answer. James's voice cracked just once. "So did I." Silence again. Then, "I messed everything up," James said. Marcus didn't look away from Rachel when he replied, "We both did." James turned to his son then, eyes full of something raw and unguarded. "But she didn't leave." Marcus nodded slowly. "So don't let her." That landed between them like a final line in a chapter. Neither needed to repeat it. A nurse came in quietly to check the machines. James stood and stepped aside. She glanced at Rachel, then at Marcus, offering a soft smile. "She's stable," the nurse said gently. "She just needs rest. Maybe more than anyone's been letting her have." James cleared his throat. "We'll make sure she gets it." As the nurse left, James turned back toward the bed. Something shifted in his face. Less fear, more resolve. He walked over, picked up the thin hospital blanket that had slipped from Rachel's legs, and carefully pulled it back over her. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. James stood there for a moment longer, hand hovering near her shoulder, before stepping back. "I forgot what this looked like," he said, more to the room than to Marcus. What it felt like to worry about someone for the right reasons. Marcus didn't respond. Then after a pause he said, "She's not the help." James turned. "She's not the nanny, or the housekeeper, or the hired emotional backup." James blinked. "Number she's not." Marcus's voice was steady. "She's family. At least, she should be." James met his son's eyes. Then he nodded. "She is." Outside the window, a siren cut through the night, distant and fast, fading into nothing. In the stillness that followed, James pulled the empty chair closer to the bed and sat. Marcus wheeled next to him. Together, they stayed. No more words. Just a father and a son, keeping watch over the one person who taught them how to stay. The sun pressed softly through the hospital blinds, thin stripes of morning light brushing over the floor and across Rachel's blanket. A vase of wilting flowers sat untouched on the windowsill, left by a nurse or maybe Mrs. Hargrove, its petals just beginning to curl. The room smelled like antiseptic and lemon, clean but distant. Rachel sat at the edge of the hospital bed, fully dressed, her bag zipped and resting on the floor. Her coat was folded over one arm. She stared at the wall in front of her as if waiting for it to offer a reason to stay. James was asleep in the chair by the window, chin dipped to his chest, breathing steady. There was something vulnerable about him in that moment. It made it harder to do what she was about to do. Rachel stood. The sound was soft, just the rustle of fabric, the zip of her coat. Still, James stirred. "You're leaving," he said without opening his eyes. Rachel turned. You should be resting. He looked up at her. So should you. Rachel gave him a tight smile, one she hadn't worn since before the hospital. I'm okay now. Did the doctor say that? Or are you saying it for my benefit? She glanced down at her hands. I can't stay, James. I never meant to be more than temporary. James stood slowly, crossing to her. He didn't reach for her, just stood close enough that she could hear his breath. Is that what you want? He asked. To go? She didn't answer. I know what it looks like, Rachel said. Me staying this long. Me being in your house. With your son. I don't want you to feel like I've taken advantage of your kindness. You haven't. But people talk, even the ones who don't speak. Marcus talks now, James said softly, because of you. Rachel's voice cracked. And he'll be fine. He's stronger than he thinks. He doesn't need me anymore. A voice interrupted them from the door. That's not true. Rachel turned. Marcus sat in his chair, hands gripping the wheels tight, his face pale, but determined. Behind him, Mrs. Hargrove hovered like a shadow, worried, but giving him space. You're not supposed to be up, Rachel said gently. And you're not supposed to be gone, Marcus shot back, his voice shaking. He rolled farther into the room. You said you wouldn't leave. You said you weren't like the others. Rachel's chest tightened. Marcus, you said you'd stay, he said, louder now, raw. Don't be like them. Don't disappear. Rachel blinked fast. Sweetheart, I know I was a jerk. I know I made it hard. I didn't know how to say things. You don't have to explain. Yes, I do, he shouted. Then quieter, his voice breaking. Because I don't want you to leave. And I don't know how else to say it. He was crying now, openly, freely, like a dam had cracked. Not loud, just steady. Rachel dropped her bag and crouched low, wincing slightly with the effort. She reached for his hand, warm and shaking. You're better now, she whispered. You don't need me anymore. Marcus shook his head hard. I need you. I just didn't know how to say it. Rachel brought his hand to her chest, over her heart. You just did. Silence filled the room. It wasn't empty. It was full. James stepped closer, standing beside them both now. His voice was thick. Rachel, he said, I didn't just hire you to take care of my son. She looked up at him. I asked you into our lives, and somewhere along the way, I realized I needed you too. Not just in that house, but here. He pointed to his chest barely. Rachel swallowed. Don't say that unless you mean it. I do, he said. I've done so many things wrong, but if there's one thing I get to do right, let it be this. Let it be asking you to stay. She turned to Marcus again, whose eyes were red, cheeks damp, breath uneven. I'm not your mother, she said gently. He nodded. But I'm something, aren't I? He nodded again. You're mine. Rachel laughed through a sob. Okay, okay. She stood slowly, wiping at her cheeks. But if I stay, she said, turning to James, I'm staying on my terms. He nodded. Which are? Rachel met his eyes, steady now. We eat dinner together, all three of us, every night. James blinked, then nodded again. All right. Weekends, she continued. We leave the house, even just for an hour, a walk, a coffee, a park bench. Marcus snorted through the last of his tears. No more therapy on Saturdays. No promises, she said, and gave him a wink. And this one's important, she added, quieter now. If something hurts, anything, emotional or otherwise, we talk about it. We don't let it sit and rot. Deal, James said instantly. Also, she added, turning to Marcus, You do your therapy without complaining. Or I walk. He wiped his nose. That's blackmail. It's motherly negotiation, she corrected. He almost smiled. Rachel looked between the two of them, James, still watching her like someone seeing hope for the first time in years. Marcus, eyes red but clearer than they'd been since she met him. Then she whispered, "Okay, I'll stay." From behind them, Mrs. Hargrove stepped forward just enough to be seen, her arms crossed but her expression warm. "About time," she said simply, and walked off. And for the first time, Rachel didn't feel like she was standing in someone else's story. She felt like she'd stepped into her own. The late afternoon light spilled lazily through the wide windows of the Whitmore living room, catching the floating dust in quiet, golden beams. Outside, the leaves had just begun to shift with early autumn, patches of yellow flirting at the edges of the trees. The house itself, once echoing with stillness, now carried the faint sound of life. Music, footsteps, and distant laughter. Rachel sat curled in the corner of the couch, one leg tucked under the other, a book half forgotten in her lap. She wasn't really reading. Her eyes followed the notes drifting through the room, coming from the old upright piano that had gone untouched for years. Her hand rested gently on the side of her belly, fingers tracing a rhythm that matched the uneven melody. Marcus sat at the piano bench. He wasn't good yet. His left hand hovered over the keys, uncertainty, while the right moved in jerky bursts, like it had to fight every nerve to obey. But he didn't stop. He didn't even complain. Rachel looked up every so often, just to check on him, then went back to pretending to read. From the doorway, James watched them both. He didn't say anything. Didn't want to. He just stood there. Briefcase still in hand, tie loosened, sleeves rolled. It was 5 minutes past 6. He was late by his new standards, and still, no one noticed, because nothing was wrong. And that, he thought, might be the biggest gift of all. Dinner that night was quiet, not awkward, just comfortable. James spooned pasta onto Marcus's plate without being asked. Marcus didn't grumble when Rachel reminded him to sit straight. Mrs. Hargrove popped in once to ask if anyone wanted her cinnamon rolls, then returned 5 minutes later with a tray, even though everyone had said no. As Rachel reached for a napkin, James said casually, "The team's flying in next week. I'll need to be at the office during the day, but I'll be home by dinner." "You don't have to rush," she said, not looking up. "I want to." Marcus didn't say anything at first. Then, without lifting his eyes from his plate, "Tell them to bring real bagels this time. Not that frozen junk." James glanced at him. "They're flying in from San Francisco. Then they should know better." Rachel chuckled, and something about the sound made James glance at her longer than necessary. She didn't notice. After dinner, Marcus wheeled himself into the living room without prompting, parked in front of the piano, and opened the lid. His fingers hovered again. Rachel followed, settling back into her spot on the sofa. She picked up her book again, but didn't open it. James cleared his throat. "Rachel?" She looked up. He held out his phone. "You have a message from the clinic, Marcus's latest progress update. It's good." She took it, read quickly, then smiled. Marcus didn't look back, but he said, "So I'm not dying?" "No," Rachel replied, "but your therapist says you're not allowed to use the word useless anymore." Even sarcastically. Especially sarcastically. He sighed, played a single note on the piano, then another. James watched the two of them, Marcus now focused on the keys, Rachel still holding the phone but not reading anymore. He stepped back from the doorway and leaned against the frame, letting his eyes adjust to the scene. Later, as the sun slipped behind the trees, Rachel put the book aside, and walked over to Marcus. She didn't say anything, just sat beside him on the edge of the bench. He didn't shift away, didn't even pretend to be annoyed. "Want me to turn the page?" she asked, nodding at the music sheet. Marcus shook his head. "I'm not playing it right anyway. You're playing it your way. That's something." He didn't answer. Rachel reached out, her hand resting lightly over his on the keys. They both sat still for a moment. "I used to hate the sound of this thing," Marcus said suddenly. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "It was always on when no one was talking. After the accident, it was just another reminder that she wasn't playing it anymore." Rachel nodded slowly. "It doesn't feel like that now," he said. Outside, the wind rustled through the hedges. Inside, the house exhaled with the weight of a long-held breath finally released. James came in just as Marcus started again, hesitant but steady. Rachel didn't move from the bench. She just sat, head tilted, listening. He didn't interrupt. He stepped back again, leaned against the door frame, and let himself watch. Not to judge, not to fix, just to be there. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. Marcus hit a wrong note, muttered something under his breath. Rachel grinned. "Still better than your cereal pouring technique." Marcus snorted. James smiled and stayed. Later, long after the lights dimmed and the piano lid closed, Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the vent and the creak of old wood settling. He closed his eyes. "I don't remember what my mother's hugs felt like." The thought drifted in, uninvited but familiar, but then came another. "But I know what it feels like when Rachel sits beside me. And that's enough." What did this story make you feel? If this story moved you, comment love below and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear what part stayed with you the most. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories every week.